With nearly $630 billion in trade flowing between Canada and the United States every year, the ongoing NAFTA renegotiation talks have been closely watched. This morning, we'll discuss how NAFTA renegotiations are weighing on companies' investment plans and how leaders in Washington and Ottawa are working to ensure our region remains competitive on a global scale. Before we begin, a few quick housekeeping notes. In addition to our audience here at the museum, we're live streaming on thehill.com/events. Please keep your phones on silent, but we do encourage you to engage in the conversation on social media. You can follow us on Twitter @TheHillEvents and comment using the hashtag NAFTA Trade Talk. We're going to be taking questions from the audience, so please do be on the lookout for members of our team walking around with handheld mics. And finally, there is a very short feedback survey on your chairs along with the agenda, so please do complete the survey before or after the end of today's program. So let's go ahead and we'll dive right in. We begin this morning with Kirsten Hillman, who is the Deputy Ambassador to the United States for Canada. Ms. Hillman previously served as the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Trade Agreements and Negotiations Branch at Global Affairs Canada, where she was responsible for leading the Government of Canada team in conducting exploratory trade discussions with China, in addition to overseeing Canada's trade negotiations agenda. Let's please welcome the Deputy Ambassador on stage. And joining the Deputy Ambassador this morning is my colleague, the Hill's Editor-in-Chief, Bob Cusack.
Thanks, Katie. Well, thanks for being here this morning. Kind of a timely event. The big question on everybody's mind is, will there be a deal? This is today's Wall Street Journal. For those who are younger in the audience, is called a print newspaper. It says, hopes fade on NAFTA deal by year's end. Can a deal be reached by year's end?
Yes, I think it can be. I think that the runway towards getting a deal that is going to be able to be passed through this Congress in the United States is getting shorter, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. And there's sort of different views on how short that runway is. But our view continues to be that there are all the elements there for a deal that would work for all three countries if we're able to get the right, get the right momentum and conversations happening.
Do you think there's momentum now?
I do. There is momentum now. So we had the ministers in town last week for several meetings. Mm-hmm. They've remained in touch since then, and officials are also in fairly deep discussions. We have a very strong sense of common goal in terms of getting the deal completed as soon as possible. So yes, I think there is momentum.
Why is a deal so important, specifically for the United States and Canada?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a few answers to that. The first answer is the size of the relationship and the importance to both of our economies of the relationship. So it is the single biggest trading relationship in the world. We have over $2 billion a day in bilateral trade, which is unprecedented globally in history. We have millions of jobs on both sides of the border that depend on the relationship. But the framework that governs our relationship is almost 25 years old. And from my perspective and from the perspective of our government, having such a momentous and important relationship, being governed by rules that just aren't really up to date with how the world does business today, is not really what we want. We really want to make sure that we can move it forward.
As far as the timing of a deal, Speaker Ryan set an unofficial timeline of tomorrow. Right. That's unlikely to be met. And that's a significant issue as far as Congress is concerned, of which Congress would vote on a potential deal. So with this deadline going to be missed, is this an indication that this is going to be punted for the next Congress, and obviously the legislatures in Canada and Mexico too?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that for the Canadian system, we don't have an impending election in the coming year. We do after that, but we don't in the coming year. So that's less of a consideration for us in terms of political change. For this Congress versus the next Congress, as I said, I think that the runway for this Congress is very short, not impossible. Nothing's impossible until the deadline has passed, right? And for the Mexican election, I mean, it's not really for me to speak to that, but my understanding is that they're quite keen to keep talking as we are for as long as it takes and right up to their election.
How has dealing with the Trump administration been in these negotiations? A lot of different players involved.
Yeah. So what I would say to that is one of the things that I think is excellent in this particular environment is that we have a number of cabinet level colleagues who have very strong relationships with their counterparts, whether it's with Treasury or Commerce or USTR or Energy. And I think that those relationships are very important to moving the discussion along down to us, the public officials, the technical officials who are doing the negotiations. Because ultimately, these agreements are about refining those relationships, the relationships, whether they be in manufacturing, in our energy relationship, whatever the specific economic driver is. And it's those cabinet members within our system and within yours and within Mexico's that have the closest knowledge of what's going on. So I think that that's quite significant.
There are so many issues that have to be negotiated, autos, environmental issues, the list goes on and on. What do you think are the biggest obstacles to a deal?
I think that it's going to be important. So maybe I can answer that more generally first. For Canada, this trade agreement or any trade agreement that we enter into, we expect it to do two things. We expect it to liberalize, open up, foster increased trade and investment. So we expect to be creating, that's what a trade agreement does, right? It creates a special relationship between two countries or a group of countries to privilege that trading relationship in order to strengthen integration. So we expect it to do that, to be an agreement of openness and integration. And we also expect it, or any other trade agreement, to be an instrument that creates stability in the marketplace, that allows for businesses to plan for the future, so they know the rules of the road, not in the sense of Otto's rules of origin, just the rules of the road for the trade agreement and for the trading relationship, so that they can plan. So that's the intro to the answer to your question. The answer to your question is the stumbling blocks for Canada will be any expectation or any proposals that go against either of those fundamental principles.
What do you think about the 5-year sunset idea, reviewing the deal after it's struck 5 years?
Right.
Along, every 5 years.
So that goes directly to sort of the second principle that I mentioned, which is we set out these agreements and we lock them down in international law so that they survive from one government to the next, from one administration to the next, to allow our businesses to plan. And a proposal that would automatically terminate the agreement every 5 years runs directly counter to that fundamental principle of a trade agreement. And so that's not a proposal that makes sense for Canada.
When you travel in the United States and Canada, what are you hearing on the ground from businesses, workers?
So it's a few things that I've heard. I think that, Canada and the U.S., and I was saying that I travel a fair bit across the U.S. In recent months. I think at the sort of on the factory floor or in the fields in our agricultural communities, people understand the degree to which we are each other's number one customer. They understand the degree to which we're interdependent in terms of our businesses and job creation. And so the first thing I hear is, please don't upset the apple cart. Don't, sometimes people say do no harm.
Right.
And that's great, But I actually think that's certainly not enough, right? I mean, our responsibility as governments is not only to do no harm, but it's to create an environment in North America that is competitive, that is world-class in terms of its ability to compete with other jurisdictions and other regions of this world, because they're not going to wait for us, right? If we don't make it happen for ourselves, then we will fall behind.
Mm-hmm. We're going to open it up for questions. So if you have a question, we have people with microphones. If you can identify yourself, and if you can keep it short so we can get in as many questions as we can in the last few minutes. In the back.
Brett Fortin with Inside U.S. Trade. Is there any room to increase market access for U.S. dairy producers, even if it does not mean changing Canada's supply management system? Are there other ways that Canada is considering that is a U.S. Priority for many in Congress?
So I think that the answer to that is that Canada very much supports and will continue to support the supply managed system for dairy in Canada. It's a government commitment. But that being said, the existence of that system and the government's support for it has never stopped us from concluding a trade agreement, including in the last few years with Europe and under the TPP and the CPTPP.
Well, as far as there has been speculation that there could be a more narrow deal or a so-called skinny deal on autos. Do you think that's a possibility where it's kind of chopped up a bit?
I think it's a possibility, certainly. I think that autos, and one thing that isn't really widely discussed is that there are a lot of aspects of the negotiations that have progressed quite significantly. These are primarily the aspects of the negotiations that have to do with modernizing the deal, so including chapters and provisions on digital commerce, on small and medium-sized enterprises, so we make sure that the benefits of the deal can be felt by everyone. We've moved quite far along in the environmental chapter, and a number of chapters that are either new completely or are building on what was done 24 years ago and bringing them up into the modern age. So, there's a lot there.
Mm-hmm. Is there a lot of modernization? I mean, I was looking back at when the deal was signed in 1993. Cheers and Seinfeld were popular. Unforgiven won Best Picture, and the Redskins were actually good. So now, and obviously now, compared to then, it's just the digital age. Yeah. Looking at it, does it look like, wow, this is kind of, in some ways, a bit of a relic?
Yeah. So relic is maybe, I don't think I'd use that word myself, but it is definitely dated, and it certainly needs a modernization. So, Canada recently concluded an agreement with the Europeans, the European Union. We have concluded the agreement with the remaining 10 countries in the TPP. Mexico has concluded its agreement with the Europeans. All of those agreements have much newer provisions in the areas that exist in the NAFTA, and then they have new things, as I mentioned, digital commerce, but also just our services chapter. The services economy is not what it was 24 years ago. It is a major driver of all three economies, right? And that needs to be recognized, and it needs to be taken account of in the agreement.
What can stakeholders do? We're writing about it, but a lot of people around the country, they're just, they're reading on it, but they have so much at stake in all these countries. What can they do to be involved and other than reading the newspaper, but be involved in this process in a public way, whether it's with their lawmakers, et cetera, et cetera?
That's a good question, and thank you for that question. I think that people who are involved in the Canadian and the U.S. economy, who are manufacturing things or selling things or involved in the service economy, need to inform themselves, and we as governments are trying to help inform them about the degree to which their economic prosperity depends on openness and integration in the North American marketplace, and then to go to their lawmakers, their business associations, go to their CEOs or their managers and say, look, we need to keep this relationship strong and stable, but we need to move it into the future. And we need to move it into the future so that we are creating the best potential competitive conditions for our North American platform. That's what I think they really need to do. There was an announcement last week between Rio Tinto, Alcoa, and Apple around the creation of a new smelting technique for aluminum that is carbon-free. Mm-hmm. And this is, to me, I was thinking about this yesterday and thinking about coming here today, and I was thinking, to me, this is the exact example of the kind of things we want to be doing. Canadian aluminum, American innovation, platform leveraged by a global company, and that's what we, as governments, should be creating the environment for our businesses. So that's the kind of message that needs to get out to lawmakers, is we need to be looking towards the future, and we need to be making sure we're competitive, because our competitors are making sure they're competitive.
One last question just on the negotiations, and obviously they're done behind closed doors, otherwise it could never get done. I understand that. But what's something that the public should know about the negotiations that maybe they don't know, that people, as you're trying to get this very difficult task done, and dealing with all the different people that they're, what is something the public should know about these talks?
I think that people should know that there are a lot of experts that are involved in these negotiations. That so our rules of origin experts. Mm-hmm. And the American rules of origin experts and the Mexican rules of origin experts. These are people who work in this area all the time. They work here at the NAFTA, they work at the WTO, they work around the world, because there's only a certain number of experts who are specialists in these areas. And that given the right direction, they can be immensely creative. They know what the state of the art is out there in the world for trade rules. Mm-hmm. And they can put the state of the art trade rules in place for us, given the right direction. So I think what people need to know is that the importance of getting those people in the right place where they can do their job in the best possible way for North America is a goal that we should all have.
Well, we've run out of time. Please thank Deputy Ambassador Hillman for joining us this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
That was great. Thank you. Well done.